Okay, so we're going to start with collisions. Here's what it looks like. I'm going to show you a very simple version of how to do this, and you are going to think of a creative way to make two surfaces collide. So this is what mine is going to look like in the end, and yours is going to be much more creative than this. I'm not going to go over how to create these platforms because they're just two boxes and a sphere, and I made sure while I was creating the sphere, or sorry, the ball, to go, while I was creating it, to press N on the keyboard and make sure that the radius X, Y, and Z are all the same size so that it is a perfect circle. So make sure if you do something that's a ball, that it is a circle. The really important thing when you're here in Modeler, when you're setting up whatever you're going to end up creating, is that you have them on two separate layers. So the platforms are on one layer, and that's because they're going to be different types of collision bodies. We're going to do this in layout, create the types of collision bodies, but they're going to be two different types of collision bodies. So we need them on different layers when we get to layout. So I have the two platforms, the things that the ball is going to be bouncing off of on one layer, and then I have the ball on its separate layer. So we also need to name the layers here, which we haven't done before. If you want to see both at the same time, I can just hold Shift and click on my layers here to see both, or I can just click on one and see the outlines of the other by clicking on this bottom triangle here. So to name the layers, I'm going to press Shift so I can see both. We have a layers tab here up top, and in here there's a section that says layers, and it's the first one, layers, and this pops up. So we're going to open up this is the name of my document, and I've already named them, but you can just click on one and it'll be checked so you know which one you're on, and you can just double click in here and rename it. So I name that platforms, and then I click on the ball layer and it shows me what it is. Conveniently, I can see what it is, and I double click in here and you can name it whatever you want, whatever makes sense for you. So important thing for the setup for this is that you have the thing that is going to be moving on one layer, and then the thing that is going to be hitting on another layer. And then you're gonna save it and send it to layout. So I'm gonna come into layout and just clear my scene and press clear so I can start fresh. And I'm going to come here and send to layout. So we have that all set up. Make sure first thing you do, just stay in this habit of camera, properties, change the resolution to HD 1920 by 1080. Always a good thing to do. So all the tools, what we're using here to create these collisions is physics. All of these physics tools are here in layout. They're called bullet dynamics. Let me get into the camera view here so you can see what's going on. Okay, so we have the FX tools, this tab here, and we have a whole list of bullet. So Bullet Dynamics is an open source library. Blender 3D, the program, also uses Bullet Dynamics. So we're going to set up the panels. So I'm just going to click on them. I'm actually going to get this light out of the way because I think it's a little distracting. And I can rotate it to light up my platform, but you know how to do all that. I'm just getting it out of the way because it's a little distracting. So I can come into my objects here, and I can see under the current item, I have my two layers, the platforms and the ball, which is why we like to name them. So if you have a lot of different layers, you can stay organized. So the platforms are going to be a static body. You won't see anything change. The static body doesn't move, so that's why we're using it for the platform. So when we make something a static body, it's something that's not moving at all, but it's preparing it to be bounced off of or for something to collide against it. So I'm coming into my FX tool tab, and then under collision body here, you see static body. So I click on it and nothing happens. I'm selected on my platforms, I clicked on static body, nothing happens. But when I come into my bullet item properties, I can see now it's in here, the platforms are listed as static. So that's in here and we can see it. So you want to check that it's in the item properties here to make sure it's working. So the other type of body here in the collision body is kinematic body, and that's something in motion, but that's still going to be collided with. So if we're thinking about a ball like a tennis racket or a baseball bat would be this kinematic body. Okay, now we're going to set up the sphere. So I'm clicking on the sphere. I could have also chosen it from the current item, the ball. Sorry, I keep calling it a sphere. It's ball or sphere. And we're coming into we're still in the FX tools. I'm in dynamic body because now the ball is the thing that's going to be moving, not what's being collided against. And it's going to be a rigid body. And the other dynamic bodies in here, the parts body is something, it can break something up. It will fall into parts in motion. And then the deforming body is like a piece of cloth flapping in the wind. It can squish or press like a rubber ball, just so you know what those are. But we're in rigid body for the ball. And then I'm going to come back into my item properties, and you can see that because I selected it as a rigid body, it's here on the list. So we just need to change a couple things in here. For the shape, we don't want it to be a mesh. A mesh will make it take longer to move. A mesh is really for more complex objects that are moving. So we're going to change it to sphere because it will move faster that way. So the dynamic object works best if you place it in motion. So to move it, we have to uncheck enable dynamics before we move it and set it up where we want it to be. Just think about anytime you want to move one of these dynamic bodies, you have to uncheck enable dynamics while you're moving it, and then you're going to have to recheck the enable dynamics to get it to move. I know that's a little confusing, but I think you'll get used to it. So you can move the sphere up. Here I am. I'm right clicking and moving it up, and you can see the mesh is staying in place where I had it, but I'm just giving it some movement, but the actual mesh is going to stay there. Then I'm going to move the time marker to 10 here, and then I'm going to drag the ball down. I'm using my right click, and I'm making sure it's actually making contact with the platform here. So it has to be touching the platform. So I've given it at frame 10, it's going to touch the platform. And now after I've made those movements, after I've actually moved it, then I have to check enable dynamics again. You can also just click it here on the left. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to just press play, and you can see it's kind of sad. Let's try it again. It doesn't really bounce. It just kind of hits the platform and rolls off. So we need to, make it more interesting. We want to make it sort of bounce and look more exciting. So we're in the item properties still. I have this open. If you had closed it, the way you get back is here. We're in the FX tools, bullet, item properties. That's how we get back in here. And we're going to first work on the ball. So I'm clicked on the ball option, and we can work on the bounciness and the friction. So I'm going to increase the bounciness here to 80. This is something you can experiment with. It really depends on your kind of object and how far it's falling. And the friction, the bounciness is bounciness, self-explanatory. Friction is like what holds things down. I can try turning that to 20. Let's see how that looks. So let's see if that looks any better. So I'm going to press play. Still not so great. So we need to change some of the item properties for the platform. So now I'm coming into the platform, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn my bounciness up to 80, and I'm going to turn my friction to 20. So I'm making adjustments to both so that they both have bounce and they both have friction. Let's press play. And that looks a lot better. Oh no! And it went off the side. So you can see you can make a lot of adjustments to where it's hitting it and where it's falling off. You can change where your actual object hits the platform and how bouncy it is. So I might want to make mine less bouncy. Maybe I want to make it, see how that looks. Yeah, that's better. So, but maybe I want it bouncing off the side. It's totally up to you. So you can see how you can change the bounciness and the friction of both the platform and the ball to make yours specific, look good, specific to what you're doing. So you're going to have something bouncing off of another thing. You're going to have a rigid body like my ball bouncing off of a static body like my platforms, and just adjust the bounciness and the friction to get it looking great. You're going to make something way more interesting than mine here. I want you to really use your creativity on this project. So we're going to add a second camera, which I don't think we've done yet. And this is to give us another angle, to give us a more dramatic angle. So make sure your time indicator is at 0 before you add the second camera. So it's the same way as adding a light. We come to Items, Camera. I'll just call it Camera 2. And press OK, and it's going to put it right at the center. It gets added to 0, 0, 0 on the grid. So I'm in cameras, I'm in my modify move tool, which is T, and I'm just moving it over. And I'm going to make like a dramatic view. Let me move back a little. Sometimes it's hard to see where you are. There we go. So I think for this it's cool. You can have from like below or above and see how that looks. So get a second camera with an interesting view that shows off your collision. And then remember to come into the camera properties for the second one. You have to change the resolution here to HD. So make sure to do that and get it all set up. So when you're rendering with two cameras, you have to render each camera separately. So think about where you want camera 1, which frames you want camera 1 to be at, and which frames you want camera 2 to be at. So maybe for me, if I wanted camera 1 to be from frame 1 to frame 20, because we don't even see the ball until about 20, about 20 we start seeing the ball. So from frames 1 through 20, I only want it to be camera 1. So I'll set up my render. I'll make sure my current item is the camera I want to be, and I'll set up my render properties to only do frame 0 to 20. And I'll make sure my output is in the correct folder, the M drive. I'll set everything up like we've been setting it up and just render the first 20 frames from camera 1. Sometimes I check just render frame to make sure I'm in the right camera before I actually render it. And then from the current item down here, you'll pick camera 2 and you can render frames 20, to 110, 106 in camera 2. So render properties, I guess it would be 21 to 106. And you would just render those frames. And then in Premiere, you'd put that PNG sequence together and it will look like it's switching between two cameras. So that's how you do two cameras. You're just thinking about the frames you want to see each camera in. Okay, so now we're going to work on fracturing, and this, similar to the collisions, I'm just going to show you something really simple, and you are going to make your own that is way more interesting and awesome than mine. So you're going to bring your own creativity into this. So I'm just making a box. I'm polygon selecting it and naming it. And I'll give it a color so you can see what's happening. Okay, so we need to break this up, and you might have noticed in multiply there's a destroy tab, which I feel like is really cool. So here, let me select this all, and the only option under here is fracture. So it brings up this box. The interior surface, when it breaks something up, we're fracturing it, it makes another interior surface, so you can just leave it called interior. We're going to uncheck preserve original. We're going to definitely check explode parts because we're breaking this apart and exploding it. We can change the explode distance to 2. These are some values that you will just practice and see what's going to work for your object. I'm going to put the randomness all the way up to 50. And the explode morph, you'll see what that ends up. It's going to be a morph that exists within the object, similar to the endomorphs that we created. So we're just going to name it exploded because we only have one. The algorithm you don't need to worry about. You just keep it at the default here. But if you wanted even pieces, you would use matrix. If you wanted all the pieces to be the same, keep it the random points. Okay, the cell count. This is something you want to turn down because the larger the cell count, the more pieces get fractured. If you have too many pieces, it's going to freeze your computer. So I'm bringing mine all the way down to just 10. So definitely, if you do anything, turn that down, and then the explode distance and the randomness you can play around with. So I'm gonna press OK, and we can see it broke it all up in these random pieces, and now it can break apart. So you can see that it's fractured, but you can't see how it's gonna look when it's exploded and all moved apart. So the way we see that is here in our morph map, just like we did with the object animation, and you can choose exploded from here. That automatically made that. So you can see what it looks like exploded. It's pretty awesome. It's a really quick way to break stuff apart and, you know, smash things into each other. So you can try whatever your object is, you can play around with those fracture values here when you open this up. So you can really test that depending on what your object is. So we're going to make a ball that's going to bump into the fracture, and we need to do that so that I'm just going to have a ball that's hitting it and looking like it's breaking it apart. So we need to do that in another layer. So I'm coming into a second layer, and then I'm turning on my fractured element just to see what it looks like, and I'm creating a quick ball. And for this, I definitely want to press N on my keyboard and make sure that these are all the same size, so 350 millimeters, make it round. You can add more sides if you want it to be more smooth. And then I can press the space bar and polygon select it, press Q and name it, and I'll make it a different color so we can see it. Maybe I'll make it purple. Okay, so we can see what it looks like. And then on the third layer, I'm going to draw a floor. Let me get this in here so I can see where it is. And I'm not going to draw walls because it's going to break apart, and I want you to be able to see what it looks like. So you can see how far the pieces go. So the wall, if there's walls, the pieces that break apart will like be stopped by the walls. Let's get this, and let's give it some floor space. And I'm going to press the space bar, polygon select, right bracket, Q, floor, make this like a wood color. Okay. All right, so we have that all set up. The box that is, or whatever's being fractured, is in one layer. The ball, the thing that is going to hit it and make it bust apart, is in one layer, and then my floor is in another. And I'm going to name my layers. So I'm in layers, and then I come into layers, and you can see I haven't saved my project yet, so it's still unnamed. So I'm double clicking on here. This is the box, and this is the ball. Remember, being organized is just super helpful in here. And I'm just double clicking and typing in the name floor. Okay, and I should probably save, Control S. Okay, so save it, it's named, and now we send it to layout. I'm gonna close out of Modeler. If your computer's being slow, that's always a good thing to do. Since I'm recording, that slows down my computer. So just think about how your computer is, what your computer needs to be healthy. Okay, I'm gonna come into my camera view. I just moved my light out of the way. And I'm going to come to camera properties, change it to HD. And I'm gonna use my move tool just to get closer. And I'm going to give it a little rotation so you can actually see what's happening. Okay, so we have to set stuff up here, similar to setting up the collision that we did earlier with the ball and the platforms. So the floor is a collision plane. So we want to click on the floor. I can see my current item is the floor. So I can come into the FX tools. I'm in the same place, bullet properties, and I'm going to make this a static body because it's not moving. I can come to my item properties and see that the floor is listed as a static body. And then I'm going to click on my ball. I could also just have chosen it from the current item here. And the ball is going to be a rigid body. So that shows up. And then the box is going to be a parts body. So the thing that you fractured, that is breaking apart, that is the parts body here under the dynamic body. And you can see when I click that, it's on the list as a parts body. We can see how it's broken apart there. So the ball, the thing hitting it, is a rigid body. Whatever surface both objects are against is the static body, and then the actual thing that's broken up and fractured is a parts body. Okay, so if your ball isn't set up so it's right above whatever it's the fracturing thing that it's gonna fall into, come into perspective, and I'm gonna make sure I'm in my item properties here. I got here from the bullet item properties, and make sure to turn enable dynamics off. I'm gonna zoom in and just take time to get the ball placed where you want it above your object. So it's gonna look like it's falling and hitting it. So just check it out in the perspective window and make sure it looks okay. You can turn on textured shaded solid wireframe to see all the fractures in there too, if that helps you. So okay, my ball's set up so it's above the fractured item that it's going to fall on. And then I'm going to turn enable dynamics back on after I get the ball in place. I'm gonna make my timeline longer. I'm gonna make it 240 so we can see what happens, because this is physics that is happening within the scene, so we can see it will keep going. We can see what it looks like. And I'm just gonna press play so you can see this. Let me click out of here and let me get in my, all right, let's see how that looks. So it's breaking apart, and that's cool, and the ball's bouncing around and the physics are happening, but it starts breaking apart before the ball hits it. So that doesn't look realistic at all, right? Let me get this back to, so to make it, the fractured element stay together until the ball hits it, we have to set it up. So we're in item properties. Again, if you're not here, FX tools, item properties, and I'm coming to the box layer. So I'm in my box, it's the parts. In the activation tab here, so activation, initial activation, put it on start sleeping. And that will mean it doesn't do anything until the collision happens. So there we go, that looks way better. Now you can see, since I didn't put the wall, if I had a wall here, the ball would hit it and stop. But without the wall, the stuff kind of can fall off the floor, which could look cool depending on what you're doing. Okay, so now there's settings in here we can really play around with, and this is where in this project, I really am encouraging you to experiment with stuff, to just try things, get creative, see how they work for you. You can control what's happening with your collision in these properties, in these item properties. So what I recommend playing with are the density and the bounciness. And the density is kind of like how heavy it is. So we can make the ball, the box, maybe we'll make that a little lighter. So let's try 500 because it was at 1,000. And I can turn the bounciness up. Maybe I'll turn that up to 50 and see how that looks. So I'm really just experimenting. You can see how that fell apart in a different way because the pieces are lighter because they're not as dense. Linear dampening, if you want to play with that, it slows the object down, where if it's moving in a particular direction, it will slow it down. And then the angular dampening, it's going to slow a rotating or spinning object, so it won't really matter for here. The glue strength is how tough something is put together, so how tightly it's glued. Let's try changing that to 1. That changes a little bit. It just changes the way the pieces move, how fast they move, how much they jitter. So this is really up to you. You can also play with the friction. Just try this stuff and see how it works. You can also come into the world and you can change the gravity. The Y is at negative 9.8. That's like typical Earth gravity, but you can make the ball have more gravity. So a higher negative number will give it, let me stop this. Higher negative number, so it's actually a lower number, right? Will make the ball heavier. So I'm on the ball and I'm just scrubbing on this, make it like negative 15. That's gonna make the ball have more gravity so it falls faster and harder and it affects the collision in a different way. So try playing with that stuff. That's in the World tab, and you can affect that gravity of the box as well. I really want you to play around with this. You can also change the angle of the ball or whatever's hitting your object. So maybe it's coming from the side, or maybe it's bowling and smashing into it. Just remember, if you're moving this, you need to uncheck Enable Dynamics, move it, and then check Enable Dynamics again. That's important.